The invitation to the 10th floor conference room came without warning, just a quick Slack message from the CEO's assistant. Callum would like to speak with you at 9 sharp. No agenda, no context. Just a time and a room. I straightened my collar, glanced once at the wall of framed photos in my office. Our first product launch. The ribbon cutting at the new wing, the holiday party where half of us were wearing hoodies and walked in. Callum Wexford sat alone at the table tablet in hand suit, crisp, his posture unnaturally relaxed. He didn't stand when I entered, just gestured casually to the seat across from him. I didn't need to ask what this was about. The signs had been building for months. New investors, reorganized reporting lines, executive reshuffling done behind frosted glass doors. But still, I hadn't expected him to move this fast. Rowena, he said, smiling in that sterile, LinkedIn-optimized way. We're realigning executive pay to reflect market pressures. I stared at him. I wasn't going to make this easy. He tapped his tablet and swiveled it toward me. Graphs, benchmarks, salary bands. Your compensation will be adjusted accordingly, down 45%. We value your contributions, of course, but it's time to align incentives with performance metrics. I didn't blink. I didn't frown. I let his words settle in the air like dust. He waited for a reaction, perhaps expecting protest or negotiation. I gave him none. Noted, I said, rising slowly. His smile faltered just a hair, the way a practiced performer stumbles over a line. As I reached the door, I glanced once over my shoulder, not at him, but at the glossy Novexus logo mounted on the wall. I remembered when it was just a napkin sketch and a pipe dream in a cold garage. Now it gleamed like a brand that had forgotten who built it. I walked back to my office with steady steps, nodded to Mallory at reception, and closed the door behind me. The hum of Seattle morning traffic echoed faintly through the window, mixing with the soft buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. I sat down, opened my drawer, and pulled out the thick folder I hadn't touched in nearly 6 months. The label was handwritten in black marker Orion Project. The Orion Project folder had lived quietly in my bottom drawer, buried beneath HR policy binders and faded sticky notes. I'd started it 2 years ago, just sketches, what-ifs, and quiet dreams written on the backs of expense reports. I hadn't expected to open it that day, but Callum's smile had pulled the latch open like clockwork. 12 years ago, there was no 10th floor, no corporate strategist, no receptionist with a headset greeting visitors by name. There was only a basement in Capitol Hill that smelled like mildew and burnt coffee, 4 of us working off folding tables, and a mission scrawled on a whiteboard in permanent marker. Let's make care human again. I went 9 months without a paycheck. I slept under my desk some nights, hoping the landlord wouldn't kill the lights on us. When our CTO's wife got sick and he couldn't afford to fly home, I wired him $600 from my personal savings and told him not to worry about it. I meant it. When we signed our first 50 clients, I called each one myself. I didn't delegate onboarding. I listened to their stories. People planning for the inevitable, wanting dignity, wanting peace. I held the hands of daughters who cried while setting up digital directives for their fathers. I stayed on Zoom calls until midnight, making sure nothing got lost in legal translation. We weren't building a tool, we were building trust. My father died the year before Novexus was born. He used to say, build something that lasts, kid, even if it's invisible to most. When I watched him take his last breath in a cold ICU room lit by flickering fluorescents, I promised I would. Novexus became that promise. But then the funding rounds grew, and so did the expectations. KPIs replaced testimonials. Retention rates mattered more than peace of mind. We hired strategists who never met a grieving family, marketers who talked in funnels and heat maps. I watched us morph into something sleek and soulless. Still, I stayed longer than I should have, until this morning, until 45% became their final thank you. I flipped open the folder and started outlining next steps. I worked late into the evening, long after the building lights dimmed and the city softened into its quieter rhythm. No music, no distractions, Just the hum of my laptop and the quiet clatter of keys as I typed a resignation letter I'd rehearsed in my head for far too long. It wasn't bitter, it wasn't angry, it was precise. 12 lines, 12 years. I didn't tell anyone. Not Eland in product, who texted me earlier asking if I was okay. Not Kendra, who still left homemade granola bars on my desk every Monday. I needed the silence. I needed it to be mine. I attached the letter to a crisp envelope and slipped my badge inside. The metal felt heavier than it should have, small but weighted, with years of late nights, early wins and compromises I'd made quietly, telling myself it was for the greater mission. Before bed, I reopened the Orion Project folder. This time, I didn't just skim. I started filling in gaps, budget estimates, LLC options, projected licensing timelines. I'd been too cautious before, too loyal. Now I let the idea breathe, not as a hypothetical, but as inevitability. By morning, the city was wrapped in its usual drizzle. I wore black. No ceremony, just clean lines and silence. I walked into Callum's office at 8:57 a.m. He was already seated, AirPods in, speaking to someone on a call. He raised a single finger, wait, without looking up. I didn't wait. I placed the envelope on the table. He caught sight of it mid-sentence, and something in his posture shifted. He muted the call. "This your decision?" he asked flatly. "It is," I said. He didn't argue, just nodded once as if he were approving an expense request. I turned and left before he could say more. Back in my office, I packed the essentials: the framed photo of my father, the notebook from our Series A pitch, and a stack of handwritten thank you cards from clients. I left everything else: the view, the corner, the prestige. They could keep all of it. At noon, I took the elevator down without fanfare, walked across the lobby, and stepped into the drizzle with no plan to return. And that's when I saw Brielle. She was standing by the espresso machine, tapping at her phone like she didn't see me coming. Brielle Tanzi, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives, my former protege, the one I used to bring granola bars to when she skipped lunch prepping slide decks. We built her first pitch together at 2 a.m. On a Saturday, sitting cross-legged on the floor of my old apartment, running scenarios with sticky notes on the wall. She used to call me her oxygen. When she looked up and finally met my eyes, her smile was thin, polite. Something stiff flickered behind it. "Hey," she said, sliding her phone into her blazer. "You heading out early today?" "I am," I replied. Voice even. There was a beat of hesitation, like she was weighing how much to pretend. "Well, good luck," she said softly and touched my arm with the tips of her fingers. It was a gesture meant to seem warm, but her hand trembled, and I knew. I nodded and stepped around her. No questions asked. It wasn't until later that afternoon, after I'd closed the door behind me for good, that the confirmation came. A quiet ping from an old colleague, someone still inside, someone who owed me nothing but decided I should know. Brielle had flagged my behavior to Callum 2 weeks ago, pulled emails, mentioned meetings with unfamiliar names. She said she was concerned about potential conflict of interest and early signs of non-compete violations. She offered to monitor internal chatter as a proactive measure. The file was even titled Rowena Risk Outline.pdf. I didn't feel anger, just clarity. She hadn't done it because she hated me. She did it because she thought she could survive this new regime by feeding it. A seat at Callum's table, a guaranteed place in the post-Rowena hierarchy. It wasn't the betrayal that cut the deepest. It was the reminder that I'd been right to keep my plans silent, that even the people I'd once carried would trade history for favor. I powered off my phone, sat back on my couch, and picked up a pen. Horizon Path needed a hiring plan, and I knew exactly who I wouldn't be calling. By the next morning, my name was everywhere inside Novexus, just not where I could see it. I hadn't posted anything, hadn't said a word publicly, but in offices like ours, silence moves louder than sound. When a COO walks out without a farewell, without a transfer memo, without a trace, it echoes. Elin texted me at 7:12 a.m. 3 people have asked if you're on vacation. I didn't answer. By 8:00, a screenshot from a client landed in my inbox, a forwarded email from someone in sales, fumbling to explain my transition. The client had replied simply, "So who do I trust now?" I poured coffee, opened my laptop, and found 17 unread messages, all from personal contacts. Some were simple. "Heard what happened. You okay?" Others were more pointed. "Are you hiring if you're building something I want in?" Then came the call. Neha Culver. I hadn't spoken to her in 3 years, not since she sat in the back of a cramped conference room in Portland while I pitched our Series B to a half-distracted panel of early-stage investors. She was the only one who stayed after to shake my hand. Her voice was steady, warm. "Rowena, I don't want to take up your time. Just wanted to say if you're doing something next, I still want in." That offer never expired. I paused for a moment, stunned by the timing. Then I smiled and said, "Let's talk." While we scheduled a call, the back-channel updates kept coming. The Novexus board was asking questions. Key clients were inquiring not just about my departure, but about how long ago the decision was made. Word was, Callum hadn't informed them until after my badge had been returned. Later that afternoon, one of the board members replied all to an investor inquiry with a single sentence, who approved the compensation adjustment. No one answered. Meanwhile, I pulled up a spreadsheet I'd left untouched for months. Hiring tiers, tech stack estimates, brand messaging notes. At the top, I typed a new date, launch projection, revised, Q2, now Q1. The diner on Westlake was nearly empty when I slid into the booth across from Eland and Kendra. Eland looked the same, neatly pressed flannel wireframe glasses, the faint furrow of someone whose mind never stops running. Kendra had traded her usual heels for sneakers, hair tied back, like she was preparing for something other than another day at Novexus. None of us ordered breakfast. Eland spoke first. "We've been talking," he said, eyes locked on mine, "and we're coming with you." Kendra nodded. "We don't need a grand pitch, Ro. We know what you built, and we know what it's becoming without you." I stared at the table, the sugar packets arranged in color-coded stacks. I hadn't planned to loop anyone in this early. I'd signed the lease in West Seattle 2 days before. A modest 2-room space above a florist. Enough for a desk, a waiting area, and dreams to stretch their legs. "Are you sure I asked already, knowing the answer?" "Callum made it easy," Eland said. "He cut half our roadmap last night. Told the team to focus on marketable features, not patient value. He told me to automate every client touchpoint Kendra added. Every single one. Even the condolence emails." I took a breath and told them about the space, the investor, the name Horizon Path. I kept it light, but their eyes lit up like it was already real. "We're in," Kendra said again, firmer this time. "Just say when." Back at Novexus, Callum tried to reframe everything as a strategic pivot. When 2 resignations hit on the same morning, HR labeled it natural churn. But clients weren't fooled. One of our oldest partners, a hospice network in Vermont, flatly refused to renew their contract. "Not unless Rowena is still overseeing our integration," the client said. There was no answer for that in the retention playbook. That evening, I visited the new office. The leaseholder handed me the keys and said, "Smells like a fresh start." I stood in the doorway, floor's dusty walls bare, and for the first time in weeks, I felt still. Then my phone buzzed with a blocked number, someone from the board. The call came from a number I didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end wasn't unfamiliar. "Rowena, this is Dana Wexler, board chair at Novexus. I'd appreciate a moment of your time." Her tone was polished neutral, but I could hear the strain tucked beneath each syllable. I agreed, but kept it short. Whatever this was, it wasn't about reconciliation. Inside Novexus, things were unraveling faster than Callum could reframe. That morning, the board had convened without press release or scheduling transparency. A partner from Ridgeview Capital, a private equity firm that held a major stake, came in visibly agitated. He opened with one line. "Why are our top clients asking where Rowena Blake went?" The room fell silent. An internal audit had already begun. What they discovered wasn't just my name on old memos, it was my signature on 72% of active contracts across 3 client tiers. I wasn't just operational glue, I was institutional memory. I'd sat with families, demoed in hospital boardrooms, walked through hospice halls on site visits no one else wanted to take. My name had become shorthand for trust. No one at that table, not even Callum, could spin that. While they circled blame, I circled progress. Back in West Seattle, I met with Neha over Zoom. Her wire came through mid-call. 6 figures. No strings. "You've got 3 years of runway," she said, "but I doubt you'll need that long." I'd finalized the brand identity the night before. Horizon Path. Simple, clean, grounded in care. Kendra had already offered to help build the messaging. Eland was sketching out the tech stack on a whiteboard covered in Post-its. The office was still mostly empty, but I could already see it. Exam rooms with soft light. A lounge with books that didn't just market services, but offered comfort. A phone line that never rang unanswered. I signed the last page of the supplier contract, packed up the initial licensing paperwork, and pinned the new logo to the front window with a strip of clear tape. Then right on cue, my inbox pinged a calendar invite from Callum. Subject line, brief conversation. Tuesday, 10:00 a.m. He chose a hotel lounge halfway between downtown and the Bay, the kind of place that serves drinks with single ice cubes and silent wait staff. I arrived on time. Callum was already seated, a cappuccino untouched in front of him, and a leather folder beside it, likely filled with whatever numbers he thought would win me back. "Rowena," he said, standing, but not offering a hand. "Thanks for agreeing to meet." I gave him a small nod and sat. He skipped the pleasantries. "Let me be direct. We underestimated the depth of your client relationships, and internal stability is shifting." I said nothing. He opened the folder. "We'd like to bring you back. Same title. Salary restored. Plus a 10% bonus tied to a 2-year vest, and full operational authority under your division. No oversight from my office." I stirred my coffee. Watched the ripples settle. He was still speaking something about board optics and public messaging, but I had stopped listening. 12 years ago, I would have leapt at that offer. But that woman, she didn't exist anymore. I set the spoon down gently and looked him in the eye. "You didn't cut my salary," I said, voice steady. "You cut your future." I stood, took a final sip, and walked away. The floor beneath my heels echoed in the quiet, each step a punctuation mark. That night, while reviewing interior design sketches for the new waiting area, I noticed a message request blinking at the corner of my laptop. A reporter from Tech Cascade. "We've heard whispers that something's brewing in West Seattle. You launching something Blake care to comment?" I didn't respond right away. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and listened to the hum of the heater kicking on. The space was still mostly drywall and concrete, but it already felt warmer than anything I'd left behind. Then I opened a blank email, copied the reporter's address, and typed 5 words. "Let me show you something." I got there before sunrise. Just me, the key in my palm, and the quiet hum of nerves in my chest. I unlocked the door to Horizon Path for the first time, flipped on the lights, and let the warmth of it soak in. The walls still smelled of paint, and the air carried the faint trace of cardboard from unopened supply boxes. The new coffee machine burbled to life like it already knew it had work to do. At 8:15 a.m., I looked out the window and froze. The line was already there. Half a block. Then a full block. People holding pet carriers, file folders, and styrofoam cups of coffee. Someone had brought a collapsible chair. Someone else had brought flowers. By 8:30, the doorbell rang. The first visitor was a teenager, no appointment, just a card. He didn't even give his name, just handed it to me and said, "Thank you for taking care of my dad's records when no one else would." Inside the envelope was a drawing of a stethoscope wrapped in ivy, scribbled in pencil. By mid-morning, the front desk, barely a week old, was covered in thank you notes, cookies, and printed emails from Novexus clients who had transferred their data already. Eland handled intake with a calm focus. Kendra moved between visitors with the ease of someone who hadn't smiled like this in years. Then came the knock from the back door. It was Mallory, former front office at Novexus. She didn't say a word, just handed me a resume and whispered, "If you're hiring, I'd rather be where the heart is." She wasn't the last. By 3 p.m., the coffee machine was groaning under constant demand. The scent of hope mixed with fresh paperwork and hallway laughter. It didn't feel like a launch. It felt like a return. Like something we'd all been waiting for but didn't know we needed. As I stepped into my new office, a desk, a chair, a single framed photo of my dad, I saw the email alert from Tech Cascade land in my inbox. Subject feature confirmed. Publication scheduled. Friday at noon. It didn't take long. 3 weeks after our opening, the numbers started surfacing quietly at first, then with panic under the surface. A Novexus insider forwarded me an internal memo: client attrition at 40%. Projections unstable. Media sentiment trending neutral to negative. The article in Tech Cascade had landed harder than I expected, not because it was explosive, but because it was honest. They told the story of what we built, what was lost, and what Horizon Path had chosen to preserve. There were no villains named, but the message was clear. Trust isn't something you pivot away from. That Thursday, a message landed in my inbox from a Novexus board member. Subject line: Re-Horizon Path. We're exploring options for an advisory collaboration if you're open to it. We'd value your insight. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed exactly 9 words: Tuesday, 2 p.m. Nothing personal, just business. And I meant it. By then, Horizon Path was no longer just a logo and good intentions. We doubled our appointment slots. Kendra had hired 2 new intake coordinators. Eland was managing our infrastructure roadmap with a quiet focus I hadn't seen in years. Clients brought cupcakes, cards, and stories that reminded us why we'd started this. And every time I paused long enough to feel it, I could hear the voice of the girl I used to be. The one who watched her father slip away in a cold hospital room and whispered a promise into the stillness: I'll build something that matters. Now I stood at the front window of Horizon Path, watching a golden retriever wag its tail tied gently to the railing. The woman beside it held a clipboard and a leash, like they were sacred things. They were here for us. I stepped into the hallway, nodding at Mallory, who was mid-laugh behind the desk. Elin glanced up and gave a thumbs up. Somewhere in the back, I heard Kendra's voice, soft, calm, sure. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. For my team, for myself, and for the girl who once believed you could build a company the way you build a home, brick by brick, hand over heart.